Walt Disney Company. Yeah, that's the reaction I expected. Air Bud. But I'm sure if any of you have been paying attention over the last 4 to 5 years, Disney have not just been struggling, they have been actively clawing their way for a way out of the labyrinth of bad decisions they have made as a company that have resulted in huge financial losses, box office bombs, you name it. This is an incredibly stark contrast to the Disney we knew for so many years. Today I wanted to look at all of the monumental cock-ups Disney have gone through for the past few years in more detail to discern just how exactly we got to this point, with over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, and veggie, and more. As someone who can sometimes get absorbed in their work and as a result has ordered a lot of takeout in the past, Factor helps me make substantially healthier meals quick and easy without sacrificing time that I could be spending on making all these weekly abominations you love so much. Many of you may remember my endorsement of HelloFresh earlier this year. Well, Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's truly something for everyone. Switching between the brands feels great, and now you can all enjoy both brands at a discount with me. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code CARTOONCHI50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code CARTOONCHI50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off your first box and plus 20% off your next month of order. It's pretty common knowledge at this point that Disney owns a lot of IPs, many through their frankly egregious number of acquisitions that have had them taking up a vast majority of the film industry and essentially having a soft monopoly. There's also the sheer quantity of original IPs they have, coupled with the sequels and spin-offs that are a lot easier to defend from a business standpoint. I mean, why wouldn't you pump out a sequel to a movie 8 years after release if it's doing these numbers? It's fair to say that Disney has a pretty significant stranglehold on the market, especially considering two of their biggest moneymakers happen to be Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I doubt either of these need much of an introduction, or maybe they do because people don't f***ing care about them anymore. Why has this happened exactly? Well, Disney over the last few years has had the habit of mass producing a metric ton of content for many of their IPs, and it's basically left their quality up to a dice roll. Gone are the days where you're able to go mind-blowing film or anything, but most people were swept up in the hype of there being a brand new Star Wars movie after so long, and they were mostly happy. However, no one had anticipated that Disney's plan with this new money printer they had acquired would be to completely milk it dry in only 4 years. Rogue One released a year later, then The Last Jedi, and then Solo. That's 4 Star Wars movies from 2015 to 2018, and it wasn't helped by their rather divisive reception. I roll my eyes whenever people argue about The Last Jedi to this day because it's been 7 years, I really doubt there's much else you can say about it, but given just how divisive that movie was, coupled with the fact that this was the 3rd Star Wars movie in 3 years,
and there's no money in here!
Solo was the first Star Wars movie to become a box office bomb, and while a year later The Rise of Skywalker trilogy by a pretty wide margin, which wasn't helped by it being universally considered the worst Star Wars movie to date and satisfying almost no one. And while Disney has refrained from releasing Star Wars movies over the past 5 years, they haven't put their foot off the gas for even a second, producing a ton of Star Wars shows for Disney Plus that people have slipped the MCU and the story they had planned out over the course of 11 years. The Marvel Cinematic Universe entered Phase 4 and 5 with a resounding FUD. A constant stream of mediocre and divisive releases, a ton of Disney Plus shows, and gradually losing the respect and interest of audiences. Marvel and Star Wars are not the only examples of how much Disney is mass producing content without a care for the quality, but they are the biggest offenders that come to mind. Disney is perfectly content with constantly shoveling garbage into people's mouths at a startlingly efficient rate. While Disney is a company and has always had the main goal of making money, it wasn't even that long ago that they were still mostly respected due to them having a pretty consistent output of quality films. That's mostly why a lot of people, kids and adults alike, love Disney at the end of the day. They have one of the most prolific and iconic filmographies of all time, and that's because they didn't used to constantly shovel out garbage. They still made bad movies from time to time, but the Disney brand used to have this illusion of quality to it. It's how they built their reputation and why audiences have so much trust in them. Then around the time they acquired Lucasfilm was when it all started to go downhill due to them now owning Star Wars and basically having an infinite money glitch on their hands. Slowly but surely Disney would use their reputation among audiences as an excuse to give people incredibly expensive garbage with no regard for its quality, and people have been very vocal about how exhausting it all is. Live-action remakes of their animated classics, a constant stream of sequels and spin-offs to popular IPs from themselves, Pixar, Star Wars, and Marvel, which naturally leads into my next point. Disney's lack of originality is killing them on a level that they are probably aware of, but they just don't really care. Original ideas are the spark of any beloved studio, but with Disney, I mean, look at their output. I don't really need to go into much detail there, and when you compare the films and TV shows that Disney used to be famous for to what they've become today, it's genuinely almost enough to make you cry. Constantly having to rely on their previously established franchises and known moneymakers as opposed to constantly creating new experiences and stories like they used to. And when once in a blue moon they decide to make something they advertise as new, or in some cases don't advertise at all, what the f are you guys doing? It ends up being a cobbled together mess lacking any sort of creative inspiration or desire to tell a story that's innovative or worth the audience's time in any capacity. Everyone has talked to death about how pointless and creatively bankrupt Disney's live action remakes are, so I won't dwell on that for too long, but we're at a point of pure creative brain rot where we're making live action remakes of animated classics, then making live action prequels and spin-offs of those remakes. Also, yes, I know the Lion King remakes aren't even live action and are CG animated, and that fact alone is f***ing hilarious. The existence of a live action Mufasa spin-off slash prequel feels like parody. It's so pointless, and they're still making these. What the fuck is that? And beyond the live action remakes, there's the large abundance of sequels they're cranking out from their own IPs as well as Pixar. Pixar has been releasing a lot more sequels in recent years to their already successful IPs, and people were already getting sick of them back then and wanted more of Pixar's original stories. Come 2020, Pixar is in a very rough spot financially since the start of the pandemic, and many of their original movies are being released exclusively on Disney+, and the few movies they actually got in theaters aren't really doing too hot, though Elemental did pick up a bit of steam towards the end of its run, but that's just a unique case. There was a specific interview recently that caused a bit of a stir because it revealed that Disney and Pixar will be focusing more on sequels than original stories in an effort to increase their revenue after, you know, constantly losing money. And I understand the need for them to do this so they don't go under, but original IPs were what made Disney and Pixar in the first place. While the insane success of Inside Out 2 proved that there was going to be a worthwhile strategy, it does say a lot about how there's an anti-originality virus going around the offices right now. The only reason Disney and Pixar are in a position where the original movies are flopping is because 1. The start of the pandemic, 2. How expensive watching movies in cinemas is these days, 3. Literally non-existent advertising, and 4. Disney Plus conditioning audiences to not go see their and Pixar's animated movies in theaters due to them dumping everything on Disney Plus shortly after release. Disney and Pixar never used to have a problem of getting people to see their original movies. The Disney and Pixar name and good advertising was all they needed to get people on board with their new ideas. It was Disney that f***ed themselves and Pixar over like this. Pixar still has original movies in the works, but unless they pull out all the stops with advertising them, or God forbid Disney doesn't just dump their movies on streaming immediately after a few months, then people are not gonna bother watching them. They'll be on Disney Plus in like a month or two, so why bother wasting the money? People are far more likely to watch a sequel to a popular and highly acclaimed movie in theaters than an original movie from Disney and Pixar. It's a psychological thing. You already have audiences invested in the existing IP, so they'll be happy to go watch the sequel. People can just check out the New Kid on the Block in a few months and see if it was worth their time without being borderline extorted. People do want original experiences, it's just that Disney has effectively conditioned people to not see them due to how expensive they are, when there's a far easier and cheaper way of watching them later down the line. On top of them already sending their and Pixar's original animated movies to streaming during the height of the pandemic. This originality problem also extends to the aforementioned oversaturation of Marvel and Star Wars content, with there just being so much of it to the point of being overwhelming, especially when they aren't doing much to innovate. And this also extends to way more of their IPs than you might think. Mary Poppins sequel that had the cultural impact of a pillow being thrown against a wall. Hocus Pocus sequel that was basically the exact same movie as the original and was quickly forgotten. Resurrecting Indiana Jones for a second finale that barely anyone paid attention to and was also quickly forgotten. Hey, let's do Diary of a Wimpy Kid again, but make it worse. Even before the pandemic, you could see how comfortable Disney were with relying on their existing IP and banking off nostalgia, and naturally people crave for original stories, and when they aren't getting buried due to poor advertising or releasing in theaters and streaming simultaneously, or audiences choosing not to watch them because they'll be on streaming soon anyway, they're getting attention for all the wrong reasons. Last year, Disney released a new original animated movie called Wish, and this seemed to be a pretty significant boiling point for a lot of people. It was a movie released with the intention of celebrating Disney's 100-year anniversary, and all it somehow failed at being average. Any remaining faith or loyalty people had to Disney as a brand mostly went out the window of this movie. It was proof of just how far they'd fallen and how bad the originality problem was. I already touched on this in the previous section, so I'll try and keep this part relatively brief. Disney Plus, while initially a rather neat idea for a streaming service, and honestly considering how late Disney were for making their own service, it was about time something like it existed, has done an insane amount of damage to Disney TV shows, which lead to oversaturation, the increasingly unoriginal products and lack of originality in general, and now what I'm about to say about Disney Plus. It's technically all one big issue, but it's easier to break down in chunks like this due to the amount of moving parts. Because of Disney's tendency to drop new content onto Disney Plus either at the exact same time as it's in theaters, much Star Wars and Marvel, but definitely Pixar and Disney themselves. So when people see a Pixar or Disney film, there's this illusion of magic around Disney that you didn't really get with other production companies like it's a one-of-a-kind experience. Every nook and cranny of the park is determined to excite the parts of its guests that grew up and loved Disney as kids. From the music to how gorgeous and detailed the park itself is, and just seeing the tens of thousands of people who visit per day enjoying themselves was generally almost enough for me to believe the illusion was real again. It is the purest example I can give of Disney magic being something that a lot of people buy into. Seeing people be happy in that place legitimately almost makes you forget how much of a dystopian nightmare it is on paper. But my point is, while there are still plenty of people who understandably buy into the illusion of Disney magic, it has been steadily losing its power and grip on the public due to the company's recent mistakes. Mass-producing content at a rate that no normal human can keep up with, their blatant lack of new and original ideas which once made their movies thrive, instead opting for constant remakes, sequels, prequels, and any way they can imagine to milk their successful franchises regardless of the quality and take their audience for granted. Everything wrong with Disney Plus and how it has done insane damage to their brand and box office returns. Now, people can see through that illusion. The magic is gone and only Disney themselves are to blame. The main theme of their brand and the first thing people think of when they hear the company's name is all but fizzled out. Which brings me to my final point. To the people who say Disney fatigue isn't real, I must ask why you think that. Because while yes, Disney can still pull in big numbers and the company is still one of the biggest ever, and yes, too much slop and not nearly enough captivating, groundbreaking, or genuinely great productions that earns them their reputation in the first place, it is fatigue. There's no other way to describe it. They have abused the trust that audiences have placed in them, and have only provided a constant stream of mediocrity that no one can possibly catch up with. There will always be parts in all of us that love Disney, or at least the Disney we remember. And as I said at the start of the video, this isn't the first time that Disney has been in a tough spot, but whether they choose to change and get out of this spot is entirely up to them. And while they seem to be aware of the issues they're dealing with right now, I also sense that they're a bit too hesitant to change. It's not like the company is going to go bankrupt anytime soon, so it isn't an urgent matter, but they will continue to lose money if they keep this up. Not like it's a concern for me if a giant megacorp goes under, rip Bozo, but it's just bizarre to watch it happen to Disney of all companies. I'm sure Disney will continue to shape and be a part of kids' lives as they grow up, and that's important for sure, and it's been buried for some time. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Played Yakuza or something, I don't know.